Evening, everybody. You can finish up your conversations. I'll give you 10 or 15 seconds. Perfect. I'm Aaron Shapiro. I'm the Executive Director of Patapsco Heritage Greenway. We're really delighted for you to join us this evening for what is the second program in our annual Patapsco Days, and you'll hear about one got pushed back into April. You'll hear about that at the end of the presentation. But we run Patapsco Days every spring, and we are excited to highlight a range of projects. Some in some ways connected overall to broad themes connected to the 250th. As they relate to work and histories here in the Patapsco Valley. So I will also mention that there are a number of we have a number of programs coming up. Kyla will share them with you at the end. There's opportunities, beautiful days like today, to get out and help steward the watershed in a variety of our programs: stream cleanups, tree planting and maintenance, invasive plant removals, water quality education. We've got a lot on our calendar, so certainly check out our calendar on our website and continue to come out to our events. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce Dr. Kyla Pools, who is our Heritage Program Manager, and she will introduce our speaker for this evening. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Aaron. I appreciate it. So for those who don't know me, my name is Kyla Pools, and I am the Heritage Program Manager for Patapsco Heritage Greenway. I just want to thank you again for joining us today, and I want to welcome you all to another Patapsco Days celebration. Now for the main event of the evening. Our theme this year, as Aaron mentioned, is celebrating 250 plus years of history. As the nation celebrates 250 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence, we're joining groups such as HOCO 250 to highlight snippets of history from the last 250 plus years in the Patapsco Valley. So joining us today, we have Laura Houston from Preservation Maryland. Laura is the Director of Revitalization Initiatives and oversees the organization's Historic Property Redevelopment Program, which makes direct investments in Maryland's historic places through the revitalization of historic resources and communities in which they reside. Through this program, Preservation Maryland partners with government agencies, municipalities, nonprofit organizations, and developers to facilitate and manage preservation planning and redevelopment. The organization's portfolio includes 11 active projects ranging from restoration of an 18th century mill in Harford County to the stabilization and elevation of a late 19th century waterman's cottage in Annapolis' city dock. Laura's professional background is in project management, and her academic background focused on culture as a tool for representation, influence, education, and diplomacy. She earned her master's in cultural politics and policy from New York University and her bachelor's in international studies from Texas State University. Tonight, Laura will be discussing an ongoing historic preservation project taking place at the Historic Ellicott City Jail just down the road. The Historic Ellicott City Jail is listed as a contributing resource on the National Register of Historic Places for its architecture. But that framework can overlook the everyday human stories that truly give places meaning, the lives of the people who built, used, passed through, or were shaped by them. The deeper significance of the Historic Ellicott City Jail lies in its human history. Those who designed and built it, those incarcerated there, reform advocates, staff, and community members connected to a justice system that was not always just. Preserving the jail means preserving these layered stories. Today, as efforts move forward to reinterpret and reactivate the long-vacant site, people are once again giving the building renewed purpose. So with that, please join me in welcoming Laura Houston as she shares more about the multifaceted history of this site.
Well, while she's switching over to my presentation, thank you for having me, first of all, but then also for being open to hearing me talk at you about this project. It's one that's been in the works for a bit, and we're making some exciting progress. And, as alluded to in the abstract for this presentation. You know, I think often in preservation we focus on the architecture of a structure, the style, the defining features, the you know, the fabric that makes up the building and the technique used to construct it. And we lose sight of what lends significance to most historic structures, and that's the people that are interacting with the space, whose lives were impacted by it or who influenced it. So today I want to talk to you about the people that were at the jail and gave it its significance, and the people that continue to advocate for that significance to be highlighted and carried forward in the future. I won't go into too much of our organization history because some of that was given to you by Kyla just now. But in this presentation today, let's share a little bit about Preservation Maryland. We'll provide some context for the jail site so that we all know what we're talking about, and then dive into the history a bit more. And then I'd like to talk about how that has informed our approach to preserving the site and what all of that has been, the vision that has led to for its reuse, and then we'll conclude the Q&A. So Preservation Maryland is a statewide nonprofit. We work to preserve historic sites that are important to communities around the state. We do this through a number of programs, one of which is revitalization initiatives, under which is our historic property redevelopment program that assists communities directly in restoring, adaptively reusing, or planning for the preservation of historic sites. And just, we have a number of active projects. Kyla mentioned a few. One is that mill in Harford County. We're also working to assess the condition and restore the walls at Fort Frederick, and to interpret and restore an African-American schoolhouse nearby. Another project we're working on is a master plan effort for a state park in Montgomery County. So let's talk about the parcel that is 1 Emery Street, which is just, if I can orient myself that way. Thank you very much. I will assume that most of us know the space that I'm talking about, the building I'm talking about, but just in case, it does sit adjacent to the historic courthouse. Historically, these complemented one another in the services and operations. They formed a complex and still do. And this is very much something that we're keeping in mind as we develop design for the project moving forward. These are just what we call elevation photos, photos of each side of the building. If you approach from Emery Street, you do see the building straight on, and then you come around, we'll go clockwise here, and there's a bridge and stairs that connect to the courthouse and the parking lot. And then you'll step down into a sort of sunken yard that is surrounded by retaining walls, and then come around finally to your last side of the building, which is encased by another slope, and where you can see a bit more of the architectural detail of the building. So the core of the jail was constructed in 1851. They expanded it out in 1878, upwards in 1910. And then in the 1950s, it got a porch addition and saw significant renovation inside. Over the years, a lot of fill has been added to the site, so the grading has changed over time, the hillside has increased, and they did excavate the hill to place the jail there, but it's sort of sunken deeper and deeper as the hill has been elevated more and more. So there's this retaining wall has been added to over and over again. All right, so now we know the place we're talking about. I want to talk with you all a bit about the history, and I'll just say that what we're getting is only a bit of what's there. There's so much more to dig into, and certainly we hope to do that through this project. I included these two photos on this slide because I thought that they were remarkable. So this 1893 sketch is the earliest rendering that we've been able to find of the jail. So even though it was around at that point, the 1851 portion had been around 40 years, 78, almost 20. But then you have this 1905 picture, and they're remarkably similar, including the trees, the willows that led to the jail one of its name, Willow Grove. It was called that early on. But even the ivy. So I thought that was something to observe. Here you have a set of photos that we've been able to find that show the site throughout the years. You'll notice a gap between the 30s and the 70s. We didn't have as many from that period, but it's interesting to see that while the site has changed quite significantly, the exterior of the building has not. Now, it did see a good bit of work in the mid-20th century, as you can see in the 77-2011 photo. But on the exterior, if we want to talk about architectural significance, that integrity is still there. Most of its life, it was a jail. So up until the 1980s, it did serve that function. And then from 1980s to 2008, it was mostly office space or some processing for the courthouse. But it has been vacant since 2008. And we'll dig into examples of each of these here in a second, but it is on the Network to Freedom, which is a National Park Service program that recognizes sites of either enslavement or places where freedom seekers used to escape slavery. It's an example of civil rights violations in many different ways, but then it's also an example of the reform advocacy movements that took place in the 19th and 20th centuries. But then through all of this, it was a residence as well, and it served as a place of security for some. And so if there's anything that I can leave you all with today, it's that this history is complex. There are many layers to it, and each one of those deserves to be highlighted, deserves to be explored. Those layers were people's lives. They were the experiences of, the toils, the terror that they experienced, or maybe the relief, as it may be, or fulfillment. So we'll be diving into that today, and hopefully you get a sense of that. So the earliest documentation we have of the parcel or the part of property that the jail now sits on refers to it as Mount Misery. We haven't figured out why, but it would end up being a very apt. You know why?
I heard why.
Okay.
Because the laborers who had to carry the stones up here to build things, that's where the name comes. They named it Mount
Okay.
Misery.
That's very interesting. I mean, we know another place. This is sort of not beside the point, but in Annapolis, Hell Point, a historic neighborhood got that name for a similar reason of it just being a hellacious place to get to.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that would be an apt name even beyond the building of the construction of the buildings on the site. And while I don't have too much information on the indigenous tribes that lived here, we certainly don't have any documentation to connect them directly to the site. I did want to acknowledge that they did live in this area, so particularly the Piscataway and Susquehannock tribes. We do know that they had presence here, and they left their mark on this area in different ways, and so it deserves to be acknowledged. But it's not until 1773 that we really have primary resources documenting this land, and it was patented in 1773 by Thomas, and who sold it to John, who then sold it back to Thomas within a 5-year span. And then we sort of lose track. We don't know what happens. We don't know if it's developed. And not until 1818 have we found additional documentation. And it was at that time that the Ellicott brothers and the Brown brothers,
So you're just saying, you're just talking about the land itself.
the land itself.
Gotcha.
Right, this is all before the building has been built, yes. So they partition the land, and the Browns take ownership of the land. and construct a hotel nearby. I don't believe that it's actually where the jail sat. I think the jail was the first building in that position. But Urban McLaughlin then leases this large land from the Browns. He marries Deborah, and they try to manage this hotel, which sometimes works out, sometimes does not. But he ends up passing, and Deborah marries after his passing and becomes Deborah Disney. And she continued to manage the hotel that was nearby, and eventually took out a loan to buy the land that they had been leasing. And then 2 years later, she sells it to the commissioners of the Howard District, who were wanting to form an official county government, and you needed a courthouse and a jail to do that.
That is not the hotel building that's on Main Street currently. This predates that.
There is a hotel that she managed, but the hotel that would have been on that property is no longer there.
Okay.
Yeah, and it wasn't the parcel that we saw originally. It would have not been on that parcel. So yeah, it's a little unclear.
And Disney Tavern is 1770s,
Right.
and it's further up Main
Yeah.
Street.
Yeah, exactly.
And McLaughlin's General Store is across the river. That's what we now call the trolley stop.
Yeah. So we know she owned land, but we don't think there was anything on it, because these things that are referenced to her hotel, these spaces, they're further down. Thank you for that clarification. So now on to the people that actually had a hand in or on the building itself. So as pointed out, the building wasn't actually constructed until 1851. So the land had changed hands until then. But it wasn't until 1851 that Charles and Samuel built that core portion that we saw earlier in the presentation. And then in 1878, John Lang designed the building, this 1878 portion, which is what the jail is known by now, the view that it's known by now. And then there were 2 additional builders that are noted on the stone on the building presently. Throughout the years, additional hands have work on site or on the building. So in 1936, the WPA was on site and constructed the retaining wall, which is still there. So their work is still there. And then in the 1950s, as I mentioned, there were significant renovations inside. And we know that Irwin S. Porter and Sons did that work, and they used material from Roanoke Iron and Bridge Works. We found a catalog where they proudly mentioned the Ellicott City Jail as a recipient of their material. So this is just an example from the catalog. That's not the actual jail, but it does very much look like what's in the jail now, sort of, besides the deterioration. So, as I mentioned before, it is on the Network to Freedom, and this is because it was a holding site for enslaved people who were captured, as well as free African Americans who were held there either awaiting trial or sold into slavery. And talk about a few of those people. So the first person that we're aware of is Richard Martin, and he was a free black man who owned a gambling house in Ellicott City. He was arrested around the time that the jail was constructed, so I'm still trying to figure out if he was in that jail or the sort of makeshift basement jail that existed before this current one was built. But he was charged with disturbing the peace of the neighborhood and keeping specifically a Negro gambling house. And so he was taken into custody. Now, records indicate that he was released, but we don't know if he received any kind of, if he had to go to trial or if he was punished in some way. We just know that he was arrested. And interestingly, a white man was also arrested at the time for gambling again, specifically at that house, playing cards with Negroes, as it was said. Not too long after that, Augusta Spriggs was a freedom seeker who was captured, and she was taken to the jail and held there for at least, well, I suppose at most 60 days. So there was, by law, if an enslaved person was captured, a notice had to be placed, and their enslaver had a certain amount of time to come and claim them. And then if they didn't, then they would be released. And like Richard, we don't know of Augusta's fate. So we don't know if she was turned back over to her enslaver or if she was set free. Augustus Collins, who is mentioned here as well, he was another free Black man charged with disturbing the peace, but this time it was for inciting insurrection against enslavers. And there was an article in Baltimore Sun that also claimed that while he was being arrested, he assaulted the constable with intent to murder. But he petitioned the judge and appealed to be transferred to a different district in the hopes that he could get a fairer trial there than he would here. But it was denied. He defended his case, and it seems, by all accounts, competently. But he nevertheless was convicted and sentenced to be sold into slavery out of state for cash for 7 years. And again, we haven't found out his fate, which I'd love to do. So, those are some of the challenging parts of this history, and unfortunately there's more. In addition to those violations, there were public executions on site. We've seen a report of that, but we haven't been able to identify where that might have been.
Perhaps I missed it early on, but it's apparent by who you're citing that this was a Black jail, or no?
No, it wasn't.
So it was an integrated jail?
Yes. But in addition to the reported public executions, there was corporal punishment. There was a whipping post into the 1900s. And there are, of course, documented incidents of mob violence, as well as lynching threats. And records indicate that African Americans were disproportionately arrested and punished.
The crime that is cited in that previous, what time period was that?
1951, I believe that was 1951. So, So the whipping post was for men accused of domestic abuse. So it was there on site, and then it was removed, and then it was added back. We don't know a lot, and I won't get into too much detail, but oftentimes there are many examples throughout the nation of charges being brought against people of color, whether there was evidence for it or not. And we don't know if that's the case here, but it's just an example of punishment that existed on site. So there are 2 documented cases of lynchings that were initiated from the jail. The first was Nicholas Snowden. This was in 1885. Now, he was accused of assaulting a 9-year-old African-American girl and was taken to the jail. And a few days later, a group of men broke in and took him out of the jail. There were mixed reports about whether the men were all Black or if they were a mix. But they did take him just outside of town limits, and they did hang him. And the coroner did request a jury of inquest, and they found that, in fact, he was hanged to a tree by persons unknown, and he did, in fact, die of strangulation. About 10 years later, Jacob Henson Jr. was arrested for killing his employer. He said that it was in self-defense as his employer struck him first. So he was taken to the jail, and his lawyer argued that he was of unsound mind, and so asked for leniency from the judge to not sentence him to death by reason of insanity. There was a group of men who were concerned that the judge would grant that leniency and reduce his sentence. So they also broke into the jail and took Mr. Henson to a tree just down the hill and hung him there. His father, Jacob Henson Sr., would press charges against the justice of the peace thereafter, claiming his involvement and having circumstantial evidence to support that claim. But the charges were not. They were cleared.
Excuse me, was Nicholas Snowden a white or black?
Both were black men.
Both of them.
About a decade later, in 1908, William Hatwood was arrested and accused of assaulting a farmer. And shortly after he entered the jail, again, a group of masked men charged the jail trying to get in to take him. Fortunately, aid came from Baltimore, and just in time they were able to disperse the crowd. And then Mr. Hatwood was transferred the next day for his safety. And then a similar instance happened in 1922 when Lawrence Wallace was accused of stealing a watch, or arrested for stealing a watch. There's also a news article that reports that the chief of police claimed Wallace shot him in the thigh while he was being arrested, but it was common talk that he shot himself, but we don't know if that was by accident or on purpose. But once Mr. Wallace was in jail, a mob of white men came in approached the jail with rope in hand to protest his actions. And the state attorney had anticipated that there would be anger and had requested backup from Baltimore. Now they didn't arrive until midnight that day, and Mr. Clark and 3 other men had to fend off this mob that turned into a full-scale race riot. But the backup from Baltimore did come in, and they were able to transfer.
So were these events covered in the press in Baltimore and in our county?
They were covered in Baltimore. We found a few Baltimore Sun articles covering the incident after they occurred, and then demonstrations as well, protests against such actions. So they were covered in newspapers. I think most won't be surprised to hear that at a historic jail there were civil rights violations and violence, but I think what may be more unexpected is that the jail was a home for most of its life as well. The warden and his family lived on site well into the 20th century. And for them it functioned both as a workplace and a home. And they lived out their lives day to day next to the incarcerated. The women of the family, wives, daughters, in-laws, granddaughters, they cooked for the family, they cooked for the prisoners, they cleaned and made sure to keep the warden's quarters. The men were there for security, to receive the prisoners, to manage the maintenance, sometimes enlisting the assistance of the prisoners. And what I thought was very interesting, though, and again unexpected, was that most of the reports regarding the wardens indicate that they were fairly lax. They sort of approached it with a calm, kind attitude almost. And Mr. Cumberland in particular was cited a few times and quoted in Baltimore Sun articles as, showing kindness to those that were incarcerated. And he said, I just treat them right, they don't abuse their privileges, we get along all right. And in one of those articles, he says, they're not bad fellows. And so he's up there on the right. There are 2 men down here who were being held in the jail for, I think this was during Prohibition, so they were, there for drinking, so he wasn't too concerned about what they might do. 1928, the Evening Sun. So, in addition to it being the regular home of the warden and family members, it also served as shelter here and there. So we came across an incident of a family allegedly walking from Virginia during the Great Depression in search of work. And they were offered food and shelter at the jail. We also found the case of a 10-year-old girl who stayed with her father while he was in prison there. And a wife and her 2 kids staying with her husband while he was in prison there. And accommodations were made for these families to be able to stay there as much as they were able.
How long were people held there? Was this a temporary thing prior to trial?
Yeah, for the most part, it was temporary. So it was meant to be while they were awaiting trial. In one case, there was a woman held there as a witness for her husband's trial. So even if you weren't arrested, you could be held there. And there were a few cases where they were sentenced to a few years. But for the most part, they were shorter sentences, and they would serve their time in a prison or institution. Most women were sent to other institutions. So, like its history, they're just, the site is filled with contradictions. The building is filled with contradictions. And for prisoners, on the one hand, the wards kept the doors open and allowed them to roam freely, trusting that they wouldn't try to leave. So they could go out into the yard and wander around. They could wander about the building itself to an extent. We found several cases of escape attempts or successful escapes. And there were men who had an opportunity to leave at the same time, but they chose to stay behind. They weren't too pressed about leaving. Some worked in a garden. They were allowed to work in the garden nearby, in the yard. Others would help with the maintenance work. And in doing so, they might get special privileges, whether it was better accommodations, better food, more food. And the other thing was that into the mid-20th century, they operated on a fee system. So you could pay to have better accommodations. You could pay to have better food prepared, or to get to eat more meals. Now, on the other hand, the site had no running water for a good period of time. And into the 20th century, the prisoners had to use a bucket to bathe. There were toilets and there was electricity, but they were not reliable. There's an article that indicates during an inspection, the warden wanted to show off the toilets and the electricity, and neither worked, both malfunctioned. The bedding was of straw and often filled with bed bugs. That was one of the biggest complaints of prisoners. And then vermin, like mice, were prevalent, which may not be surprising. What is interesting to me is that inmates were given blowguns to either scare them away or kill the mice. So you leave the doors open and then you hand them a blowgun. Just like if you had money, you might have nicer accommodations. If you didn't have money, then you didn't have nice accommodations. And maybe you only got 1 to 2 meals a day. Yes.
So were most of these people nonviolent criminals, or was
It does seem
What you
that,
can
yeah, especially during Prohibition, a lot of it was for being found with alcohol, or it was drunk driving, or things like that. So, while there were violent criminals there, from what I can recall, the majority of the people held there, that wasn't the case per se, or it was robbery or something like that. But yeah, without money, maybe you weren't doing so well inside.
Was the money paid under the table or was it?
No, it was even into, well, we'll see this in a second, but even into the 1940s, 50s. So if you could pay 75 cents a day and you'd have your meals. But if the warden could feed you for less, he could pocket the money, and it was a known thing, it was allowed. So, yeah, it wasn't under the table at all, it was a common practice. So here's a photo from 1931. It's a bit hard to see, but it's a federal prisoner in a furnished cell, and he has a blanket, he's got a fan, he's got wall decor. So he's living it up inside. And then in 1952, another photo just to show you a bit of what it looked like. So this is a hallway on the first floor. And they were very proud of the stove that they've installed and the wonderful heat that it provided. Yes?
It's my understanding that many of the houses in Oella, some of those smaller houses and factories, didn't have plumbing well into the 20th century.
I
So
imagine
the fact that the jail didn't is no surprise.
Right,
They
yes.
didn't have it here on Main Street.
Certainly,
Yeah.
right, yes. But speaking of conditions, we can talk,
I was
yes.
just gonna ask, back when they were originally cited the jails, was there any concern about it being so close to the female institute?
I haven't come across that, that's a really great question. And I haven't seen that in my research. Now, that institute, as somebody here surely knows,
When did what?
the institute, the female institute, when did that conclude?
After the Civil War, but I don't know how long after.
Yeah,
Well,
70s.
okay, so, I don't know what the crossover there was, but I haven't come across that. I think they felt it was secure enough. Or just, there's so many cases where they just didn't seem to take it seriously. But not that I've seen. So we do know from reports and inspections that conditions were not ideal. There was poor ventilation, it was structurally unsound and insecure in some ways. There's a case of somebody digging their way out and being able to escape that way. Another group escaped through the cupola. I think others just stole keys, locked the warden inside, and walked out the door. Left the door open, and others chose to stay there. I think they were afraid of getting in trouble, but it was dark and damp and dirty. It wasn't well lit, and sure, it's a jail, but it's a space where humans are living day to day, and they're under the care of the government. So while it's understandable that they're going to be confined to a small space, we're hoping that they're not, being terrorized by vermin or, suffering from illness due to conditions. But these led to transfer requests. There's a record of somebody pleading to be sent to a prison in Baltimore rather than go to this jail. It often failed its inspections. And in 1952, there's an article in the Baltimore Sun that says for many years it has had an on-again, off-again reputation as the worst in the state. So much so that it did reach Congress in 1945. And they had a discussion, there's record of a discussion about Maryland jail conditions, and they reference the Ellicott City Jail specifically, and state that it's about as bad as one could imagine. And their goal is to see improvements and modernization brought to the building to improve conditions for those inside. And here's the note where the fee system still prevails, so the warden collect 75 cents a day for each man committed. If he can feed them for less than that, the saving goes into his pocket. So they did receive money from Congress to renovate the jail, which is what prompted the 1950s renovations and that porch. And these are the blueprints from that work. So they restructured the interior entirely. They added a floor, they changed floor location, they changed window levels, and created more space for better separation of sexes or ages. So now there's more opportunity for, one of the issues was that they only had, a couple of large cells, so they didn't have many places to hold women separate from the men. So with these renovations, they could do that. And now they have perhaps a bit more of the light and ventilation that they didn't before.
What year was that?
1954, I think, is when the work took place. 52, the porch was added, a kitchen, mechanical. 54, so in that area, they were doing work on the jail.
The reason I'm asking is because my father was born in there.
Is that right?
And when I was born, I lived there.
Really? Oh my, well, I'd love to talk with you.
Yeah. But I mean, I only lived there the first couple of years of my life, so
That's amazing.
as far as I remember, but my father always said, I always wanted to talk to the prisoners.
Yeah.
He always told me that I would go talk to the prisoners.
Yeah.
So and it must not have been really bad guys at the time. but
Right.
Yeah, he was warden for 7 years.
Amazing. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing. I'd love to talk.
But that's why I like to know what's going on.
Yeah. This would have been early to mid.
And and I went to church right down the other end at Emory, so I've been here around all my life here. So
That's incredible.
it's
One time, the black and white people kept in the same cell.
So I have not necessarily come. She asked if black and white people were kept in the same cells. That I can recall. I have not come across segregation within the jail. That's not to say there wasn't, or there was, but I'm not recalling coming across that in the research so far. So, all right, we talked about the history, we talked about some of the history, I should say. So I want to go into, if I may, a little bit about how we take all of this information and how we have used this moving forward to inform our preservation approach, along with several other steps we took. We being Preservation Maryland. So preservation cannot be done by any one person, any one group. I think it absolutely takes collaboration and engagement, and that is what we wanted to do here. So we've had the pleasure of working with the University of Maryland School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation to conduct historical research on the site, which a lot of which I've used tonight. We had the Maryland Historical Trust walk the site with us to discuss its contributing features. And the Maryland Department of Transportation's archaeology team conducted a phase 1 investigation on site as well, and we've been very fortunate to have their support there. We also did a feasibility study, so we looked at what are the challenges of reusing the site, what are opportunities, what lends itself well to reuse, and spoke with the county and many stakeholders, some of which are in this room, about what community might like to see take place at this jail. We knew that the preservation and the history mattered, and we wanted to be sensitive to that. And that feasibility study helped us understand what sort of program we could have on site and the steps to realize that goal. We also were able to rely on the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission and get their thoughts on this project and on the vision and their feedback on it as well, which we value greatly. So, given the integrity of the exterior and how little change it has seen over the years, we knew that we didn't want to make significant changes. apart from, and I'll get into this a little bit, but there'll be some site changes, but it's seen an evolving site over the years anyway. But the siding, the masonry, there used to be a metal roof on that back, and then a slate roof on the front, all of that, the cupola, the retaining wall from the 1930s, all of that we want to restore, we want to keep in place, we want to revive. And then we heard from folks that so these are interior shots of the jail, I should add. And this is on the second floor, and that's first floor, that's second floor, and then those are the spiral, that's a spiral staircase connecting the two. And we heard from folks when we had our workshops that retaining material inside is very important. Even though this is from the 1950s, which is technically outside its period of significance, it's still a huge part of the site's history. And we wanted to retain some of this, but do it in a way that is respectful of those who were held on site, and respectful of the history, and sensitive to all that has occurred here, and the how people value the space. Yes.
Why was 1950 outside of the period of significance if it continued to be a jail until 1980?
That's the National Register and the Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties. They
50-year
included
rule?
at the 50s, yeah, for the district and for the jail. So I think 1950 or 51 is technically the cutoff for the National Register listing. So it is listed on the National Register, but and we have part of our feasibility, we did several site assessments as well. So it included a preservation assessment, it included geotechnical assessments, structural assessments, environmental site assessments. I mean, you name it, it was there. And the preservation plan that we commissioned indicated, primary significance from your 19th century, secondary significance from your early to mid 20th century, and then items that were added later that didn't lend significance. So they delved a little bit deeper into it than the National Register nomination does. So we took that feedback, that input, that history, and the care that the community has for this space. And what we developed as a reuse vision is on the first floor, it's serving as a multi-purpose public meeting space for small events or lectures or workshops of that nature. We will be partnering with the University of Maryland School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation for them to host their graduate studio there. So on the second floor, they'll have classroom space, an office space, space to research and to work to continue, diving into and supporting preservation, and also getting experience on real life preservation projects. The intent is for us to partner with these students or bring them onto projects, as we have already done on a couple of occasions. And then the third floor will be office space for Preservation Maryland. So we're currently based out of Baltimore City, and we would be moving our headquarters to Ellicott City, as we feel like it's a very appropriate place for a statewide preservation organization to be, and it's also central in the state, so it's an ideal location for that reason as well. Equally as important, though, to the architecture is the use of the grounds and the purpose that the grounds will be serving. It's multi-fold. So we want to increase the green space given the flooding challenges that Ellicott City has seen. And a big part of that is supplementing stormwater management in adherence to the watershed master plan. And then adding not only landscaping, but interpretation. We see the majority of interpretation about the site's history being outside, so that as folks visit the new Kaplan Center, as they visit this museum, if they choose to visit the jail, they can access those grounds and they can read about its history. So our goal will be to take this and develop it into this.
Whoa.
This is our latest rendering. And as you can see, there's a lot more green space added. And now we will be proposing to add an elevator addition. So right now, there's not ADA access throughout the building. Jail didn't really need that. So we're looking at placing the addition in the footprint of the 1950s porch. And it's actually a bit shorter than the porch so that it allows for you to see this historic siding and the stone. And then we opted for glass so that you could see the historic windows and the stone through the addition and when you're inside the addition. And this will allow people to be able to access all of the floors. We've also placed our vertical circulation so the stairs are in that addition as well. And we did endeavor to make that footprint as small as we possibly could so that it didn't detract from the building itself. And the bridge also will be reconstructed and attached to that addition so that it allows for ADA access from the courthouse, from the parking lot. And then I have a little bit more about the site here in this next slide. As you can see, there's your bridge. Here's your parking lot up here. Now we do anticipate that most folks will be parking in that lot, coming around and entering through the bridge or going down the stairs and entering that way. Nevertheless, we also have a couple of ADA adherent parking spots in front of the building so that if you come up Emery Street, there's a place to park there and you can access the building either through the front or through the side through an ADA compliant path. And you'll note, some more greenery here where it'll be all native to this region plants and deep rooted as much as we can to try to help with soaking up that water and filtering that water. But an important part of this is also increasing the stormwater management. So it's a small parcel, but we're trying to do as much as we can within it. And we learned that we have to install enough infrastructure that would allow the woods to be in good condition after a peak flow, which means reducing as much damage to the nearby area as if nothing happened, which is a bit of a challenge given how small this site is and the range of water that comes from the parking lot and drops onto the site. Nevertheless, our civil engineers have been hard at work trying to figure that out. And we're looking at installing chambers to hold that water, as well as a filtration system to, the water would feed through that filtration system, along with the plants to try to clean up water before it rolls downhill and reduce the amount of water that is rolling downhill. And there's a flume that takes water from the parking lot and dumps it onto the site. So we want to bury that into a pipe, feed it into the chambers, and continue that filtering that way. All of this has to be approved by planning and zoning. So this is just what we're proposing at the moment.
But how are you gonna get, I guess my question is too, with the surrounding areas being, the streets and all being so small.
Yeah.
Getting equipment and the things needed to revamp the building, getting things up and down those small streets, I mean, because some of them are in bad condition now.
Yes, certainly there are trucks that have no business being on the road leading up to Emory. I think most likely staging areas will be, now this is yet to be determined, but we'll discuss with the county the best way to stay out of the way. But I imagine that the staging for construction would be a corner of the parking lot and material will just have to be lowered or brought on site that way from above rather than from below. So definitely we want to be mindful that our impact is as minimal as possible. So this is kind of just going over what I've already shared. So I'm going to run through this a little bit, but restoring as much material as possible. There aren't many existing historic windows, so a lot of them will have to be replaced. There really aren't contributing doors either, so those doors are going to be replaced. There are windows in the back that are historic, and we do intend to repair, restore those, and make them functional again because they're not currently. Those are back here, so you see where restoration and kind of replacement of windows on that back portion. And we do intend to restore the porch, and then we'll have a small space for the trash and mechanical right here, encased in a fence, yes.
Is the plan to restore the slate roof? I was
Yes.
assured a while ago, oh yes, it's a slate roof, when I took photographs, it was clearly asphalt shingles, and they said, oh yeah, well, they couldn't afford to do the slate roof repair, so they just put asphalt shingles on top of the slate.
Yeah.
But the plan is to repair.
Yes, yeah, so that L portion, the back portion, that has asphalt shingles. The front looks like it may be slate, imitation slate.
Oh, really?
But we do intend to restore that slate roof and the metal. There would have historically been a metal roof on that elm, so we would like to do that.
That's great.
All right, so floor plans here. This is the first floor. This is where we intend to, those events that for the community or regular meetings, if you want. We'll have a conference room with walls that we can peel back to open up the space. We'll have interpretation in this area, and we are retaining the cell bars there at the front and the spiral staircase. And then the back L portion will become a kitchenette to support events and bathroom.
So you'll have the bars, but you won't have like a cell mock-up or anything?
We won't have a cell mock-up per se. We're working with the interior design team to figure out how we can convey that through design. And want to have, that may be represented in photos and interpretation and things like that. But yeah, for use of the space, we won't be keeping the walls there. On the second floor, that's where UMD's space will be. So you have a classroom space that can be subdivided into two. We'll have a wall that can be folded again. Copy space, library space, a little area to come and collaborate and work together. And then again, same sort of footprint with bathrooms and a kitchenette for those who are working on site. Third floor, PM offices. So this is the floor that has seen the most work. It's got 1970s, 80s finishes in there. CMU block covering the walls. So we see this being majority of PM space where we'll operate out of and just turning that into office and a bathroom, always connected to the addition of each of these floors.
And is the third floor the level that the bridge connects?
It is. It is, yeah. With that, I want to say thank you to the Howard County Historical Society, Patapsco Heritage Greenway. We have pretty much all of our information and research what came from the Historical Society, and we were greatly assisted on that. And then, the Maryland Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we're so grateful for their guidance on this project. And then the Maryland Department of Transportation, who has been tremendous in informing the archaeological history. And I just want to acknowledge some of the team members who have helped us in this effort. So HT Tracers, they prepared the preservation plan. Michael Graves Architecture, that is our architectural firm for this reuse project. Vigorously did the feasibility study, and the University of Maryland has provided all of the research that collated the research that I rely on. But I also want to thank everybody who has participated in conversations, the local preservation advocates, the keepers of history that you all are, and constituents who spoke up initially to protect this jail and advocated for it to remain and not be demolished, and for the history to be front and center in its reuse. So thank you to you all for the work that you've done and continue to do.
You know, jails in the justice system are such a, they tell us a whole lot about our society. And you've referenced some very interesting, stories. Certainly the civil rights stuff is critically important, and I think needs to be emphasized. I think there's some other things, who were people arrested during Prohibition, and what were they doing during Prohibition? Were there, there were fights at the Bloody Bucket and the trolley stop now. I think there are a lot more stories out there, people who were incarcerated and why they got there. I think, the whole racial thing is a lens that I think is fascinating because it's a little bit different from now. Not as different as we'd like it to be, but it's a little bit different. But they're, people still get in fights, people still kill each other, people still steal things, blah, blah, blah. And some of those stories, it would be nice to see some of those stories.
Yeah, so as I said, this is but, a drop of all of the lives that have passed through here, absolutely. And because I think oftentimes it's a bit easier to find information on events such as the one that you've heard about tonight because of the nature of them, and it's a little bit harder to find some of the records for the other inmates and find out more about their lives. But absolutely, that's something that we want to do and that we hope to explore further. Some of you may know already, we did receive a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts to hire a consultant to do that work, to work with community members on what they'd like to see in the interpretation. Unfortunately, that grant was rescinded because of the nature of it. But we are looking for funding to hire that person, to hire that consultant to work with folks and to do that research. To the layer, as you've noted, the history here, it's so nuanced, it's so layered, and we really want to try to capture that the best that we can, given what records we can find. Yes.
So is the funding going to be available, particularly with the budget crisis that we had in Maryland?
Well,
or is there hope for additional funding sources?
There's hope. We're looking at different opportunities, different funding opportunities. So maybe it's an arts council, maybe it's preservation, maybe it's museum. So we're trying to find creative ways or to secure funding for this and support that work that we think is quite crucial to this project.
Is there a timeline yet, or?
Yes. So we're about 75% of the way through design. And that will then go for approvals through the National Park Service, the Maryland Historical Trust, and the HPC, the Historic Preservation Commission here. But our goal is we must break ground this year, undoubtedly, because we have funding deadlines that we've got to meet. So this year, and then our hope is to have an aggressive construction schedule. We're in the process of soliciting proposals for a construction manager who for them, the most important piece for me is to get a project schedule, identify any long lead times on materials, start getting those in right now, and let's do this, let it go off without a hitch. Wishful thinking for construction projects, but one can hope. So I would imagine that this is, we're looking at maybe at least 12 to 18 months if all goes well. So that's with a very, very aggressive schedule, very aggressive. So don't hold me or hold me to it. Yes.
I don't need to be intelligent, but what is the cost of the project and where is the funding coming from?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fair question. So in 2022, we had the assistance of a construction manager who came in and assessed the cost just to bring the building back online. So it wasn't to restore it to this, it was just kind of what needs fixing and what would it cost. And we've then used that budget to inform ballpark what we're looking at. And we also, in our feasibility study, they came up with a range and they said it could be 6 to 8 million. The construction manager that we're in the process of hiring, the goal along with coming up with that timeline is to finalize that budget, establish that budget. We're gonna find out, what the big dream is, what that costs, and then maybe some reality checks and bring that down. Now the funding, we've raised over $4 million through public funds. So state grants, federal grants, philanthropic foundations. So we've put a good dent in that. We're also launching a capital campaign to raise additional dollars to sort of cover the gap that we're anticipating. But yeah, it's a pricey project, but we think it's doable.
That's wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Thanks, Laura. I guess one question I have is sort of comparative models you have for projects. This is, when I think of prisons and penitentiaries, up in Philly, the Eastern State, or Mexico City's National Archives, Constitution Hill in South Africa, that have been large-scale, notorious prison complexes turned into museums, archives, things along those lines. But these are really big, massive sites. Are there comparative examples of, counties and communities restoring local jails in this context, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, there are correctional facilities in Maryland that have been adaptively reused, so they're no longer used for that purpose, and they're smaller. Now, I don't think the approach has been, I'm not familiar with the details of those, and unfortunately I can't recall specific ones, but there's still been care given to the buildings, but maybe not that as technical as we've tried to be here. But most of the examples that we found or that we looked to during our feasibility study to kind of inform that vision, they were larger prisons, these larger penitentiaries that, there is one that I think has been converted into apartments, and we're like, well, that's maybe not where the direction we want to go in here. So yeah, I do feel, and maybe some of this is because I'm in the middle of it, but I do feel that this is a bit unique. Its history and those complexities and what we're trying to do around and within the space is quite unique to the location, especially the stormwater management. Okay. Any questions? Wonderful. Thank you all so much.